I have always loved words and writing, even before I could write. This is my very first book. It's a story about a saltine cracker that meets a little girl named Anna. I couldn't even write words, so my parents transcribed the story for me. But you can see that I was already trying my best to write alongside them. I kept on writing and making books throughout my childhood. Every Christmas, I would make a new story to give to all of my family and friends. It became a tradition that carried on right until grade 12. My last self-published book is up there, Santa's Snow Angels, and I actually got that one professionally bound. After high school, I went on to study at UBC. I did my master's in children's literature focused on writing and fairy tales, and it was there that I met some of my best friends who now work in the publishing industry across Canada. It was also during my degree that I got my first job interning at a publishing house. The internship turned into a full-time editorial position, and I worked as an editor for over 10 years. I've worked on many books, mainly picture books, including this one, When I Was Small, by Sarah Leary and Julie Morstad. I think editing taught me the most about how to be a better writer, how to get the story just right. Despite the pleasure I have editing others' words, crafting my own holds a unique joy. I kept on writing my own stories throughout this period, and my first picture books, board books, and eventually my first chapter books were published through different publishing houses, including HarperCollins and Disney Hyperion. Tonight, I'd like to show you 2 examples of how my words become a published book, starting with that one, Clover's Luck. The first step is to have an idea that I feel passionately about, one that warrants writing. For the chapter book Clover's Luck, it was a perfect storm that inspired me. I was teaching at camp in Penticton where students were creating magical animals and writing about them. The night the camp ended, some of my teaching friends and I went out to a pub for some food, and we were discussing old jobs we've had. And one of my friends, who is actually here tonight and presenting, was describing the job he had working at an animal shelter. It was the stories that he told combined with the pictures that the students had written that gave me the idea to write about an animal shelter for magical animals, not ordinary animals. Once I had the idea, or once I have any idea, I plot a lot. I usually do about 15 drafts of a plot, and this is the initial plot for the Magical Animal Adoption Agency. Even so, despite all my plotting, oftentimes the story changes a lot when I sit down to write. With a plot in hand, I begin to write, and I tend to write by hand. I like this because I can get really into the flow of writing, and if I come to a spot that's stuck, I can doodle or skip lines. I'm a very messy writer, though, and I need to type up my chapter after a day of writing, otherwise I cannot read it. At last, with a typed up draft, I send it off to my agent and then the editors for their thoughts. The edits are often done now in track changes or different editing programs. This is probably the second draft that my editors sent back to me from Disney and HarperCollins. But not all of my edits were just writing. Some of them were also drawings that I had to do for my editors. One of them was to get a better sense of the layout of the agency or the setting where my story takes place. Once there was a more final manuscript, it was sent off to the illustrator Alexander Boyget. And I'm really lucky because my editors have allowed me to have some say and feedback in the art. These are different character sketches of the main girl, Clover, and there were 8 in total, and I got to look at them all. Luckily, I liked the same ones that the illustrator liked, that also the editors liked. So all was well. At last, many drafts and edits later comes the final book with the design. Even once you get the proofs, there are some last changes, but once the book is printed, there is no making changes to the words as much as I may want to. Although the process with Clover's Luck began with the words, some projects start off the opposite, with images. These are 2 images from Paula Zemkimi's work. She's an Argentinian artist. My agent came to me and asked me if I was inspired to write any stories based off the gorgeous work of a new client of hers. And of course, I said yes. And I started to look at some of her art. This is a series of different seasons. She also had these adorable animals. And I just kept thinking about her different images, and I started to do some drafts. One of the picture books that I wrote followed the seasons, and it was about a little puppy and a little girl. And one of them was actually, here they are up here. It was called Seasons with My Puppy. Another story that I tried to write was in rhyme, and I'm not a poet. So both of these were failures. They did not turn out the way I wanted them to, even though I did show them to my agent, but both her and I agreed that I was trying too hard to create a good story. So I took a step back. It was summertime. I went on some hikes. I just took a look at the world around me. I had some campfires. And then one afternoon, I penned a new draft that begins with these lines. Trees make great umbrellas. Umbrellas are the perfect boats. Boats never listen, but seashells always do. And it went on like that. I shared this draft with my agent. It was called Secrets That I Know. And my agent liked it, and she sent it on to the editor and the illustrator, and they liked it too. However, the work was far from over because although my editor loved it, she only loved the first 6 lines. There was many more. Thus began a wonderful and torturous process of revising the text. This is a book that is closest to a poem, really, and I had a notebook, this notebook, that I carried around everywhere with multiple versions of the text scrawled out in it. What's tricky about this text is that the last word of a line must be repeated in the next line. The page you saw up there was one of the many pages that never ended up in the book. I actually loved that process a lot, even though I began obsessed with writing and rewriting the text. Now the text is in the hands of my editor and the artist and is still 2 years away from being published. Everything in the publishing industry requires very much patience. But in the meantime, I'll just keep writing as I always do.